The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth through the towering redwoods of the Pacific Northwest. It was late October, a Tuesday. Mark and Sarah, a couple from Seattle, had driven hours for this, a long weekend escape into the quiet, a winding trail deep within the Olympic National Forest, the kind of place where the only sounds are your own footsteps and the distant rustle of leaves. They walked for hours, lost in conversation, the sun filtering in dappled patterns through the ancient canopy. It was beautiful, serene, a perfect, ordinary day. They stopped for a moment, near a gnarled, moss-covered log that had fallen centuries ago. Sarah was adjusting her backpack when Mark, always scanning the forest floor, noticed something half buried in the damp soil. It was small, dark, rectangular. He knelt, pushing aside a layer of decaying leaves and mud. A camera. Not a phone, but a sturdy, old-model digital camcorder, its casing scratched and grimed, a thin film of green algae clinging to its edges. It looked like it had been there for a long time, forgotten, or perhaps abandoned. Curiosity, a potent and dangerous force, took hold. He picked it up. It felt heavy, cold in his hand. Back at their cabin later that evening, the camera sat on the counter, a silent, mud-caked enigma. Mark spent an hour carefully cleaning it, clearing the charging port. To their surprise, the battery took a charge. A few anxious minutes passed, then the small screen flickered to life. The display showed a date from 3 years prior. They pressed play. The first few minutes of footage were unremarkable. Shaky, amateur shots of the same forest they'd hiked that day. Close-ups of moss, a brief glimpse of a deer vanishing into the undergrowth, a pan across a tranquil stream. It was peaceful, almost meditative. The camera seemed to belong to someone enjoying a quiet day in nature, just like them. Then, the footage changed. The camera was no longer handheld. It seemed to have been placed on the ground, angled slightly upwards, capturing a patch of dense woods. The light was fading, the shadows deepening. The person behind the camera, or what remained of them, was out of frame. The only movement was the swaying of distant branches in a faint breeze. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Mark and Sarah leaned closer, a vague unease beginning to coil in their stomachs. What were they supposed to be seeing? And then, a sound. Faint, distant. A rustle, deeper than any animal. A shift in the forest's natural hum. The camera remained static. The next sequence was fragmented, jarring. The camera seemed to have been picked up quickly, haphazardly. The view was chaotic. A blur of trees, sky, then the ground again. A low, guttural sound, barely audible, seemed to emanate from somewhere just out of frame. A sound that felt more like a vibration than a noise. The camera then settled again, placed hastily on a rock, facing deeper into the woods, towards a patch of impenetrable darkness where the trees grew thickest. The image was grainy, almost black, but for a faint glint. A reflection, perhaps, deep within the shadows. And then, a shadow itself. Not a human form, not an animal. Something taller, thinner, impossibly still, standing at the very edge of the discernible light. It was there for a single, agonizing second, then gone. The camera remained focused on the empty darkness. The footage continued to record the silent, vacant woods for another 2 minutes. The camera was still, but the light was almost entirely gone. Then, without warning, a sudden, violent jolt. The camera pitched forward, scraping against something rough, the lens filling with blurry soil and leaves. A choked gasp, not loud, but raw, primal, erupted from the speaker. It was unmistakably human, a struggle, or a desperate intake of breath. The screen went black. The battery had died. Mark and Sarah sat in stunned silence, the small, dead screen reflecting their own pale faces. The peaceful evening had shattered. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that they had just witnessed something profoundly disturbing, something that felt like the last moments of a human life. The next morning, they drove straight to the nearest ranger station, then to the county sheriff's office. The footage was handed over. The investigation that followed was meticulous, yet yielded nothing. Detectives scoured the area where Mark had found the camera, expanding their search for miles. They found no traces of a campsite, no discarded gear, no personal effects, no signs of struggle beyond what the footage suggested. No missing persons reports from 3 years prior or since, in that specific region, seemed to match the timeline or the chilling implications of the video. The blurred, fleeting shadow was impossible to identify. The guttural sound, analyzed by audio experts, was inconclusive. Potentially animal, potentially human, distorted by the forest acoustics and the camera's old microphone. It was nothing and everything. The footage became a ghost, an anomaly that defied all logical explanation. Was it a prank, an elaborate hoax designed to terrify? The age of the camera, the deep burial, the sheer effort involved in maintaining the ruse for 3 years in the wilderness spoke against it. Was it an accident? A hiker falling, succumbing to an unseen injury? But what of the shadow, the inexplicable stillness, the deliberate placement of the camera facing into the impenetrable dark, and the gasp, so utterly, horribly final? The police eventually closed the active investigation, filing it under unexplained occurrence. Mark and Sarah, however, were never the same. The image of that dark, unmoving figure, the sound of that final, desperate breath, it burrowed deep into their minds. They had found not a forgotten artifact, but a window into a moment of pure, raw terror. A terror that had simply dissolved into the silent, indifferent vastness of the forest. To this day, the footage remains. A fragment of a life, a sliver of a mystery, preserved on a decaying memory card. It sits in an evidence locker, a digital whisper of a truth no one can comprehend. The forest, ancient and unyielding, holds its secrets close. It swallows sound, absorbs light, and occasionally, it returns a chilling glimpse of something that should never have been seen. We watch the grainy, silent woods, the fading light, the impossible shadow, and we are left with the chilling certainty that some stories simply have no ending, only a silence that lingers, a question that echoes in the dark.